Okay, picture this. September 24th, 2025. 4 Russian military planes, right? Including 2 nuclear-capable bombers. They get intercepted by U.S. jets, way up there off the coast of Alaska. Now, this wasn't just, a routine patrol. It felt like something else, a calculated message. And it happened literally the day after the U.S. president made this really stark warning, basically changing the game rules.
Yeah, the timing is just, wow. It takes what could be a normal professional military encounter and makes it explosive. Geopolitically speaking, it was clearly a very quick, very direct response. Almost like they were testing the waters, seeing if this newly hardened NATO stance was, well, credible. We really need to unpack this today. What was this formation so far from home really trying to say about Russia's bigger picture?
Welcome to NationScope Podcast.
Here, Jordan and Jamie dive into the latest headlines, the breaking stories, and, yeah, the critical events shaping the U.S. and the world.
From politics, culture, economy, tech, we analyze the news that really matters.
And today, we're doing a deep dive, looking at the sources you sent, over everything from diplomatic chatter to military briefs. Our mission really is to dissect this near crisis off Alaska and pull out what's truly important.
Okay, let's dig in then. The source material we have, it makes pretty clear this Alaska intercept wasn't just a one-off. It seems like it was part something bigger, right? A coordinated push from the Pacific all the way to the Baltics. But what's fascinating, I think, is how this specific flight seems like a direct, almost nonverbal answer to this new, much more aggressive rules of engagement talk coming from NATO leaders.
Exactly, and we'll get into that today, this idea of horizontal escalation. We need to define why Russia might be poking defenses in, let's call them secondary theaters, and we'll link it to their long-term game plan up north, the Fortress Arctic strategy. By the end, you should have a really clear sense of how just one flight in that gray zone highlights the huge risk of, well, miscalculation between nuclear powers.
So let's start with the intercept itself. What exactly was in that Russian formation on September 24th? You mentioned it wasn't standard.
Oh, definitely not standard. Analysts would call this a deep strike package.
Yeah.
You had 2 Tupolev Tu-95, the Bears bombers. These are long-range strategic platforms, the backbone of their air command, and yes, crucially, nuclear capable.
Yeah.
And they weren't alone. They had escorts. 2 advanced Sukhoi Su-35 flanker E-fighters.
Wow. So the Tu-95s, they're designed to launch missiles at North America. I mean, is there any other way to read that than Russia showing off its reach?
Honestly, no. That specific combination bombers plus advanced fighters, it really removes any doubt. It wasn't just about seeing what's there like reconnaissance. It simulates an actual attack profile, thousands of miles away. It's a pretty clear signal. We can still reach you, even with everything else going on.
And NORAD, North American Aerospace Defense Command, their response had to send an equally strong message back. 9 U.S. aircraft scrambled, is that right?
9, yeah. And it's how they responded that's telling. It wasn't just fighters. They sent up a whole system. An E-3 Sentry AWACS, that's your command center in the sky. 4 F-16, the interceptors. But here's the kicker. 4 KC-135 Stratotankers. Aerial refueling planes.
4 tankers. That sounds like a lot of support for just 4 Russian planes. What's the signal there?
It signals endurance. It signals logistical depth. Sending 4 tankers basically says, our fighters can stay up here as long as needed. We can shadow you the entire way, no matter how long you fly. It demonstrates that North American defenses aren't just quick. They're built for sustained operations against, well, prolonged maneuvers like this.
Which brings us to where this happened. The Alaskan ADIZ, the Air Defense Identification Zone, that's international airspace, right? Not quite U.S. territory.
Absolutely key distinction. It's international airspace next to sovereign territory. And the Russians were careful. Technically, they followed the letter of the law. They didn't cross that 12 nautical mile line into U.S. or Canadian sovereign airspace. This is textbook gray zone stuff. Push the envelope, provoke militarily, test defenses, make the other side react and spend resources, but do it without actually committing an act of war, a political message without firing a shot.
Okay, NORAD might call these intercepts regular, but the sources we looked at suggest the whole situation has shifted. I mean, the frequency alone is pretty startling. This was the 9th intercept in 2025. Compare that to just 12 for all of 2024. What does that jump tell us?
It points towards a deliberate strategic choice, likely from the top, to ramp up the pressure. And it's not just how often, it's how aggressive they can be. Remember back in September 24, that incident NORAD called unsafe, unprofessional. A Russian pilot getting too close. Plus, we saw that joint Russo-Chinese bomber patrol back in July 24. It's an escalating pattern, and it feels coordinated.
that coordination, that brings us back to this horizontal escalation idea you mentioned. This Alaskan flight wasn't happening in a vacuum. It seems tied to a wider Russian push across different areas in September 2025.
That's the core concept of horizontal escalation. If you feel like you're stuck or losing ground in one main area like Ukraine for Russia, you deliberately stir things up elsewhere. You create pressure in secondary theaters, hoping to distract your adversary, stretch their resources, maybe force them to pull back focus from the main fight.
And the evidence for that is what was happening in Europe around the same time. Because there, they weren't quite sticking to the letter of the law.
Not at all. That's the contrast. Alaska was provocative, but technically lethal. Europe was different. Just 5 days before the Alaska intercept, September 19th, 3 Russian MiG-31 jets flew straight into Estonian airspace. That's NATO territory. They stayed there for 12 minutes over the Gulf of Finland before Italian F-35s escorted them out. That's a direct poke at Article 5.
A direct challenge to NATO's collective defense. Wow. And there was more.
There was. Around the same time, Poland reported shooting down Russian drones, said 19 violated their airspace. And then near Copenhagen, large drones, unidentified but suspected by Danish police to be from a capable actor, were disrupting air traffic.
So Moscow's making the whole alliance jump. From NORAD watching the Arctic to Sassur, the NATO commander in Europe. They're stretching everyone thin, basically.
Exactly. Hitting multiple points at once. Testing reaction times, testing political will, testing command structures across the board. It's probing for weaknesses, for seams in the alliance. Pure horizontal escalation.
But these moves weren't just about testing military readiness. They were also, it seems, a direct reaction to some pretty tough talk coming out of Washington, which gets us to the political trigger for that September 24th flight.
Right. The military action didn't happen in a political vacuum. That specific 295 flight looks like an immediate reply to President Trump's sudden change in tone on Ukraine just the day before September 23rd. You know, for months, the talk was about potential land swapping, concessions. Then, boom, a complete pivot.
Yeah, he came out saying Ukraine could fight and win all of Ukraine back in its original form. He called Russia a paper tiger, said their military was fighting aimlessly, economy in big trouble. Strong words.
Very strong. Probably the most forceful endorsement of a total Ukrainian victory we'd heard from the administration.
Yeah.
But even more significant from a military risk perspective was what he said about NATO's rules of engagement, the ROE.
Oh, yes. He was asked straight up, should NATO countries shoot down Russian planes violating their airspace? And his answer was...
Oh, very clear, very simple, yes, I do.
Wow.
And NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte basically backed that up right away.
Oh.
He confirmed member states should shoot down intruders if other steps fail and it's necessary. That shift from just escorting intruders out to publicly saying shoot them down, that fundamentally changes the calculation for any Russian provocation. The risk goes way up.
So the timing. The 295 showing up off Alaska the very next day, that couldn't have been a coincidence. It was a message sent directly back to Washington.
It had to be. Moscow was basically saying, okay, you're talking tough now. You call us a paper tiger. Here are our strategic bombers near your coast. They were testing the credibility of that new rhetoric. It was a high-stakes question. Are you actually going to act differently now, or is this just talk we can ignore?
And we need to put this specific flight into the bigger picture of Russia's whole Arctic strategy, this Fortress Arctic idea. It's a massive military buildup happening right up there.
It's huge, and it's been going on for years. It's almost an existential thing for them. They've reopened or rebuilt something like 50 old Soviet bases and posts. That includes 13 air bases, 10 advanced radar stations. They've put in serious hardware. Bastion P coastal defense missiles, S-400 air defense systems. They're building what military folks call an A2AD bubble, anti-accessory denial across the high north.
And why this massive investment up there? What's the goal?
2 main reasons, really. First, it's defensive. Purely about protecting their crown jewels. The nuclear ballistic missile submarines based on the Kola Peninsula. Okay. That's their second strike capability, their ultimate deterrent. They cannot afford to lose that.
Makes sense. And the second reason?
Money. Economic survival, basically. The Arctic holds something like 90% of Russia's natural gas, maybe 17% of its oil. Huge reserves. Plus, the Northern Sea Route. That shipping lane across the top is way shorter between Asia and Europe. Moscow sees it as their internal waterway, not international waters, and they back that up with their military footprint and, their giant fleet of icebreakers, over 40 of them.
So how does this Arctic focus connect back to the war in Ukraine?
Well, because Russia's army, their conventional ground forces, have taken such a beating in Ukraine, they're kind of compensating. They're leveraging the parts of their military that are still largely intact and capable, primarily their aerospace forces and their navy, to project power globally.
Ah, so it's a compensation strategy. The Alaskan flights are a way to show strength elsewhere, even while bogged down in Ukraine.
Precisely. It's a signal. Don't forget about us. Even with the land war, our strategic forces, based in the Arctic, can still hold North America at risk.
Okay, stepping back then. What's the main takeaway here for you, the listener? When you put together the military probes, the tough new rhetoric, Russia's long game in the Arctic, it really looks like they've fully embraced this doctrine of horizontal escalation.
That's the thread connecting it all. They're deliberately creating friction points in the Arctic, the Baltics, elsewhere, partly to distract NATO, partly to drain resources away from Ukraine, and critically, probably to build leverage for future negotiations whenever those happen.
So for you listening, what should we expect going forward? Probably more probing in the Arctic, right? Maybe more complex flight patterns, closer approaches.
I think that's very likely. More complex formations, maybe pushing closer to that 12-mile sovereign limit. And definitely keep an eye out for more joint patrols with China, like we saw back in '24.
And the real danger now, it feels like this old idea of Arctic exceptionalism, that the Arctic was somehow separate, a zone just for science. That's completely gone, isn't it?
It's over. And that's the critical risk right now. You have this collision. More aggressive Russian gray zone behavior, meeting a newly declared, much tougher NATO stance, the shoot them down policy. That combination dramatically increases the risk of miscalculation.
A hair trigger situation?
Number of
Can you
things.
explain why that risk is so much higher now?
It boils down to what might happen at the tactical level between individual pilots. Imagine a Russian pilot pulls another unsafe maneuver like they did before, but this time the U.S. or NATO pilot intercepting them is operating under new rules, with potentially more authority to use force. A split-second bad judgment, a misunderstanding in the air that could spiral incredibly fast, from a tactical mistake to a major escalation between nuclear powers. The danger isn't just theoretical anymore, it feels much more kinetic.
Which leaves policymakers with a really tough challenge. Based on everything we've discussed, this new, tougher rhetoric needs to be backed up, doesn't it? With actual resources for deterrence and for Ukraine.
That's the crux of it. If the U.S. and NATO talk tough, but then don't follow through with sustained military aid, financial support for Ukraine, the kind of support that the rhetoric implies, well, does that make the tough words seem empty? And if Moscow perceives those words as hollow, does it actually embolden them to push even harder, maybe take even bigger risks in places like the Arctic? Balancing that matching words with deeds, that's the incredibly difficult tightrope policymakers are walking right now.
You've been listening to NationScope Podcast, where Joran and Jamie analyze the stories shaping America and the world. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.